Welcome, everybody, to Bitcoin Hard Talk, episode 96, part 2, This Week in Macro. In This Week in Macro, we're going to be covering how the new Shanghai Proof-of-Weapons Network is threatening dollar dominance. And it is a journey. This is not a radical, it suddenly happens, but this is a journey, and there is no doubt in my mind that we had a massive escalation in terms of moving to the next phase of these multipolar world. And a multipolar world, you have multiple proof of weapons network. Now, at the moment, we have the US as the dominant proof of weapons network. That has transitioned over to BlackRock and the privatized companies and corporations. But there are other countries which remain sovereign: China, Russia, Saudi Arabia, and they've also put themselves together into blocks, which we cover in macro and we cover in the geopolitical section. But there was a show and a demonstration in the Shanghai Cooperation Organization meeting this week. And I want to make sure you understand the implications as well. So let's cover some of the news stories, and then we're going to be diving deep into that as well. So this week, there was more consolidation of the US proof of weapons network, which is being vassalized into BlackRock, State Street, and Vanguard through its subsidiaries that I've always covered, that I collectively call the proof of weapons network. One of the major banks, which is a shareholder in the Federal Reserve, which is able to print dollars, which is a publicly traded company with BlackRock as one of its largest shareholders, has decided to hand over $80 billion of wealth management services over to BlackRock. BlackRock, which has its Aladdin AI artificial intelligence technology, which has got vast data that even the Federal Reserve and the Treasury and many of the biggest asset managers use, is now consolidating more and more assets. So it's got another $80 billion of assets as Citibank is being consolidated and putting a bunch of its assets up the chain. Now, those that manage the assets are the controllers through those shares and those management agreements, which gives them more power in the proof of weapons network. And so Citibank is essentially moving out of wealth management now and handing over more of that power into, so they're now mainly a money printer with an investment bank and a retail bank, which means you get to create dollars through your retail bank or your commercial banking division. And through the investment banking division, you get to securitize, financialize, and create the products that essentially BlackRock and the asset managers, wealth managers purchase for other people using their money, which is pooled together through these large pools of capital, like either getting investment from sovereign wealth funds, endowment funds through colleges, insurance premiums through insurance contribution, pension funds, municipal funds, all sorts of funds that then hand over that money to BlackRock. Right. So we've been looking for this big trend. So obviously Trump has been pushing for his 300 points basis point cut at the Federal Reserve because he wants to roll over the trillions of dollars of debt with short-term 3 to 4 week bonds. And that is pushing up the price of the longer term bonds. There's been no action for a while. It's all calmed down in the US longer term bonds. But other nodes of the proof of weapons network, i.e. in Europe, are having some big problems, particularly this week, UK, leading up to the operation that I covered last week on September the 13th. And so that is in line with our predictions and forecast. You get financial distress. We'll go more into that. But on the US side, we had unemployment data from the US FOMC. That went to 4.3%. This basically builds the case for Jerome Powell, to do the next Fed rate cut. It will probably be a token cut of 0.25%. And the justification for it, because you've got Trump pressuring, they're trying to look like he's strong arming because he's going to be leaving in the second half of next year. He wants to go out in style, Jerome Powell, And Trump wants not for monetary policy reasons, because inflation is on the rise. And so when inflation is on the rise and you want to cut rate, the only thing you can look at is employment. And so if unemployment is increasing, then you can have a justification of why you might want to cut rates. And so really, I think this is sealing in. And we've had lots of manipulation with data where they keep correcting it. Now, Howard Lutnick saying he's going to put it all on a blockchain, which will be interesting. What about the corrections? But I think this all moves towards getting that cut that's going to happen in September, despite the fact that there is inflation, which is inherently inflationary. As Trump runs the economy hot and assets are going to go up, which pushes the K-shaped economy, which those in debt are going to get wrecked. Those that hold fiat currency are going to lose more value. And those that own assets are going to be the recipients of this essential fiscal dominant strategy that the Trump administration is going for. So this is expected to continue the inflationary trend up, and Trump is certainly going to be inflationary, especially if he gets his shadow Fed. We'll cover that in a little bit as well. But the drama that was happening over the last 2 weeks was all around the India and US trade war. It escalated significantly. So if you remember, I've always said that Trump is installed by the Proof-of-Weapons Network to implement the tariff policy to reset the world order into this multipolar world. And tariff was a way of drawing everyone closer to their regional blocks, whether it be the GCC, whether it be BRICS, whether it be the SCO that we'll be covering in a little bit. So we're seeing it in real time. And so while Modi went to visit the White House and was looking all good, we'll do a deal together, Trump was giving it the large one, make America great again. They're caving. There's going to be 0% tariffs on their side, various other things. We're going to bring in billions of dollars from India. It wasn't working the way they wanted it to work. And this also coincided with Trump taking credit for, the peace deal between India and Pakistan, which is a tension type of escalation. And India is an important part of BRICS. And so this was the excuse really to push India, the I in BRICS, closer to China, and also resolve many of those different types of disputes, those border disputes, because China has been working with Pakistan, who used to be vassalized by the IMF, and is now a part of the Belt and Road Initiative. And there's that power struggle between US and China, caught between the IMF and the Belt and Road Initiative, which has caused historic tensions with India. But in line with the announcement, America asked India to stop buying oil from Russia and put a lot of rhetoric around how India is funding the Ukraine war. Now, we know that the Ukraine war, if you've covered any of my previous episodes, that the Ukraine war is not going to end because it was an escalation of NATO deliberately by the CEO to vassalize Ukraine and take down Europe and conquer more territory for Russia, negotiate those rare earth mineral deals. When you follow the money, you get and BlackRock was collateralizing a lot of the debt, and many of the countries like UK, Germany, France were going to be going into economic weakness as a result of China taking away its cheap gas. But India basically called for the US and basically called them out, saying, no, we won't do that. We won't stop importing gas and oil from Russia. And in fact, the US imports significantly from Russia. So why are you pretending to sanction and telling me we can't while you're still doing it? And also, Modi called out the European Union, saying that the European Union is giving it the large one and sanctioning Russia, but it's also importing from Russia still significantly. And so India there was a public fight, a bit of that hypocrisy was showing. And these are the types of destabilization campaign that I believe Trump, working for the financial industrial complex headed up by BlackRock, was allowed to be president and installed to achieve. And so what happened immediately afterwards? Well, Modi went and met with Putin and then headed over to China for the Shanghai Cooperation Organization SCO meeting. Now, what I want to do right now is give you a little bit of an AI summary of the meeting. I'm going to be publishing a blog later this week that really breaks it down. And then we're going to go through this new Shanghai Proof-of-Weapons Network that is emerging. So, Azad, if we could play the SCO AI summary, we're going to play that right now, and then I'll be back right after to go through the macro implications.
Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, we're digging into some really eye-opening research by Simon Dixon. It's his paper, How the New Shanghai Proof-of-Weapons Network Threatens Dollar Dominance, a Multipolar World in Motion. Our job here is basically to give you a quick rundown, sort of an AI summary of his main points, get behind the headlines. Okay, let's unpack this. So picture this. First, you have this kind of quiet SEO summit in Tianjin, almost flew under the radar. Then just days later, bam, a huge military parade in Beijing. Xi, Putin, Modi, even Kim Jong-un, all standing together. Dixon says this whole sequence isn't just standard stuff. It's historic, like a public unveiling of this new system, one that's resistant to sanctions, mixing finance, AI, and serious military power.
That's exactly it. Dixon's argument is these aren't separate events. They're the reveal. He calls it the new Shanghai Proof-of-Weapons Network. Basically, a global alternative where, financial and tech independence aren't just ideas, they're backed up and enforced by actual military hardware you can see. Makes the whole thing sanctions proof. The summit laid the tracks, and the parade really showed the muscle behind it.
Okay, so the SEO is really throwing down a financial challenge. Looking at Dixon's research, what are the key moves, the ones that are really designed to, shake up Western economic control?
Well, the main thing is building a whole separate infrastructure. Take the SEO Development Bank. It's set up as a direct rival to the IMF and World Bank, basically saying, we don't need your institutions for funding.
Yeah.
And then there's their own settlement systems, designed specifically to get around SWIFT. That means money can move without the U.S. watching, which really hits at the dollar's roll and trode. Plus, you've got China pushing its Beidou GPS alternative across these countries and this joint AI center. It's all about breaking free from Western tech platforms.
You mentioned India's role is critical here. What does Dixon say about Modi showing up? Why is that such a big deal? What makes India so sort of pivotal in this whole network?
India's interesting. It's got its own massive tech infrastructure, right? Like the Aadhaar ID system, their own payment network bypassing Visa, MasterCard. They're not easily pushed around. So Modi being there gives the whole SEO alliance this global legitimacy it might not have otherwise. Makes it look less like just a China-Russia thing. For Washington, Dixon argues it's a real headache. The U.S. wants India in its corner, but Modi's clearly playing both sides, moving towards more independence. Dixon even says that photo, Modi with Xi and Putin, could be one of the defining images of this decade.
Wow. Okay, switching gears then, from the money side to the military spectacle in Beijing, what kind of proof of weapons were they actually showing off, and what message were they trying to send?
Well, it was definitely a message, not just a show. They rolled out carrier killer missiles, hypersonic stuff clearly aimed at challenging U.S. heat power, drone swarms too, and even some kind of mystery laser weapon hinting at next-gen tech. You had nuclear powers, Russia, China, North Korea all together, showing off what Dixon calls deterrence in formation. It basically proved there's real military strength underpinning these new financial and tech systems.
Right. So with that military backing clear, Dixon looks at America's own long-standing network. He calls it the MIC, FIC, CIC, T-Court military, financial, consumption, and technical industrial complexes. Given this Shanghai challenge, how does Dixon see these U.S. complexes reacting? Are they adapting or are they vulnerable?
It changes everything for them. These new currency rails, they directly challenge Washington's control over global money flow, the FI, the financial complex. Dixon says it adapts. They start creating BRICS ETFs, swaps, money follows profit, not flags. But the CIC and tick consumption and tech, they're hit hard. They can't just pick up and move supply chains overnight. So they start demanding tariffs, subsidies, basically protection. Dixon even floats the idea that some of the strong U.S. reactions, like tariffs, might be partly political theater, managing the shift while looking tough.
Okay, so pulling it all together, what are the main takeaways from what Dixon calls America's turning point? And you mentioned weaponized finance. What exactly does that mean? And where does Bitcoin fit in this picture?
Right. Weaponized finance just means using access to the global financial system, trade, capital, even a country's currency as a weapon, sanctions, swift cutoffs, that kind of thing. For America's turning point, Dixon lists about 7 key things: finance moving away from the dollar, military power becoming more balanced, AI sovereignty rising elsewhere, the financial sector hedging its bets, the consumption tech sectors getting exposed, India giving multipolarity a boost, and North Korea's presence solidifying that bloc. In this world, Bitcoin emerges as this kind of neutral ground. It's an escape hatch from weaponized finance. Now, the big financial players, the FIC, they want to custody Bitcoin, use it for leverage. But Dixon emphasizes self-custody. That's about individual survival, holding an asset neither side can fully control if you actually hold the keys yourself.
So the SCO summit, the Beijing parade, these weren't just events. They were the public launch, you could say, the launch of this new Shanghai Proof-of-Weapons Network, marking, as Dixon puts it, America's turning point.
Yeah.
The era of total dollar dominance, he argues, well, it's over. The world's got a new operating system, maybe with the Shanghai Address.
Exactly. And in this emerging multipolar world, Bitcoin, specifically self-custody Bitcoin, becomes maybe the only settlement layer that neither major bloc can completely turn into a weapon against the individual. Self-custody is the proof, the leverage that remains ours. Something to think about, wouldn't you say?
Okay, so there's a little summary from the blog that I'm about to create. I'll make sure I dig into a few of the details. So for those of you that haven't heard of the SEO before, that's by design. You aren't meant to hear about it in Western media other than, those that are searching for it. And so maybe you did hear about it, but it consisted of about 11 members initially. But the important part on the geopolitical side, while we're focusing on the macro right now, is that the later members that joined were both India and Pakistan. Now, Trump wants to take credit for the peace agreement between India and Pakistan. India got all upset when Trump was taking credit for it. And then we had this public display and argument over oil and various other things that then drew India closer to China. And this isn't just a short-term thing. This is all theater. You know, all of these things are determined in advance. They don't just happen. You don't make major, ginormous changes like that, just on the whims like they would have you believe. But Trump is a destabilization campaign to reset the world order and push the world closer to these BRICS and GCC corridors while major disputes get settled and America is shrunk into a regional power and all military profits move over from the East back to the West. And so you have an escalation in Europe and Central America and South America, which I've been covering anyway. So India and Pakistan are members there, and obviously they have a lot of tension. And there is the US-China proxy war that's happening within Pakistan, and then the disputed Kashmiri area as well, which then ties into, on the border of Pakistan, is also Afghanistan and Iran as well. And Iran joined in 2023. And this is when we started seeing the normalization between Saudi Arabia and Iran that led to what we're going to be covering in part 3 in the geopolitical section as well. But also the SEO has partners and observers, which includes NATO, which obviously is strategically important. Sorry, not NATO, Turkey, which is obviously strategically important because they're essential for getting oil to Israel, and they are a member of NATO, and they started escalating and tying off trade with Israel, and we're covering more of that in the geopolitical section. And also Saudi Arabia, which is obviously very important because the source of most of the disruption within the Middle East is that Saudi Arabia and Israel aligned with the West, and Iran was aligning with the resistance. And therefore, you had all these funding of militias, like on the Western side, ISIS and Al-Qaeda, on the Iranian side, Hezbollah and Hamas and the Houthis, and that created the profits for the military industrial complex to have these forever wars through this strategic tensions like Operation Gladio, and a narrative to pitch to the West that whenever you wanted to engage in these wars and this disruption, you could paint that it was the war on terror and various other things. But another member as well is Egypt, which becomes strategically important in the Northern African region close to the Middle East. And so this is a very important corridor for the Belt and Road Initiative. And when you reset the world order and drive India closer to BRICS, which was already done, like they were obviously, because they have a lot of securitization and financialization, BlackRock and the Proof-of-Weapons Network wanted to escalate a war to see if they could get more and more spending from India over to America, but they started spending in Russia, and therefore the tactic didn't work, and we had this resolution. My suspicion is it was China that actually resolved it, as was the peace agreement between Iran and Saudi Arabia. But as usual, Trump would take credit because the falling empire is using its media and propaganda. As it is shrunk to a regional power, it needs to look as good as possible in front of its host nation. And so this week we had two events, and they were back to back. We had the SCO summit, which was in Tianjin in China. And this was essentially revealing, I think, the financial architecture and really the technical architecture, what I would call in the US Proof-of-Weapons Network with BlackRock as CEO, the financial industrial complex and the technical industrial complex. So in Shanghai, they've been building their financial industrial complex and technical industrial complex, but all of it is subordinate to the vast sovereign wealth and gold reserves. And they don't have a Western banking system, where a central bank becomes turns all of the companies where the government becomes subordinate to the large corporate interests like we have at the West. And because the government still remains sovereign, you have like 99% real estate penetration from the people and vast investment in infrastructure, because the country's not taken over by companies that only care about profit, stock prices, financialization, and securitization. And so you have these two models competing at the moment. One's more authoritarian, the other has the freedom of speech element to it. But we're seeing this alternative proof of weapons network build, and that has led to significant investment in this alternative technical industrial complex and financial industrial complex. But they're all state banks, which is the opposite of the American system with the Federal Reserve, which is owned by the private banks, and the private banks then can lobby and own government. And now the government doesn't work for the people; it only works for the corporate interest. And so you have this hostile takeover of the collective West, where they're essentially raging war on our own people, not investing in our own people, and creating civil unrest so that they can buy assets for pennies on the dollar and the cheap. But the second meeting was essentially the military industrial complex division of the Shanghai Proof-of-Weapons Network. And this is where they had a massive military parade. And this is where all of their weapons are on full display. And it was attended by both China, Putin, Russia, North Korea, and collectively, this creates this new Shanghai Proof-of-Weapons Network, which is kind of a multipolar world order demonstration. And it's enforced by its finances, the Shanghai Financial Industrial Complex, artificial intelligence, technical industrial complex, and its weapons through the military industrial complex, but also more decentralized because it relies upon regional powers and regional blocks where China is the manufacturing base for them all. And so there, rather than doing the old tactic of the International Monetary Fund, which is where you destroy countries, don't allow them to compete, do economic hitmen techniques. If you want to learn more, read John Perkins' Confessions of an Economic Hitman. And do the neo-colonialism mercantile strategy of destabilizing countries, installing puppet governments, and making everyone your enemy, which was the US, who had the proxy vote over the International Monetary Fund. So the post-Bretton Woods World War II world order that America became the empire on. Instead, they're using their financial industrial complex to say, we won't interfere in your politics. we will do the same technique of lending you money, and we'll build your infrastructure. And if you default, we will, own those assets but we want you to succeed because we want you to buy our products, and we don't care about how you govern your country. We won't interfere. And so more and more people across the entire global south are comparing the IMF with the Belt and Road. And now you've got these BRICS investment bank and this SCO investment bank as well, that is providing all of this capital. And that's why the world's order is being reset. And BlackRock, who controls the collective West, is now negotiating with these sovereign countries. And that's why you had the tariff policy, in my opinion. And so the global south and basically the domestic consumer industrial complexes, by investing in all these countries, they want to replace the 15% of goods that are exported to America to other countries. And they've got the whole world to look at. And so this is about building up the rest of the world in a post-colonial European, American colonized world, making those countries more wealthy so that they can buy from China. And if America flexes and said, right, we're going to enter into a trade war, which they knew they couldn't win. I mean, we've been covering it throughout the whole thing, right on Liberation Day, which was liberation from the dollar day, on April the 2nd. I covered everything that would happen. And this is resetting the world order. It wasn't about anything else. And so, China wants to replace that 15% by having internal consumption, i.e. a wealthier population with a wealth effect that owns all their real estate in the country as it grows, and also builds up other countries. Now, I'm not saying China's the perfect. It's got authoritarianism. It's got its own humanitarian crisis. We're going to be criticizing the Shanghai Proof-of-Weapons Network as it becomes a more dominant power in this multipolar world, because that's what we do. But now we are criticizing the BlackRock one because it's creating all the crimes against humanity. And China is not aggressive in terms of war. BlackRock and military industrial complex and the Proof-of-Weapons Network is very aggressive, connected to every single war that's happening in the world today. And so at the conference, at the SCO summit, they announced basically the financial and technology blueprint that they would like to be moving forward, any country that wants to be a member of the SCO. So they announced the SCO Development Bank, which is going to be an alternative to the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank. What else did Trump do? He weakened all of the constructs of the US empire. USAID, National Endowment of Democracy, said NATO, you got to go on your own, and really weaken the constructs of what made America able to dominate through terrorism many different countries. Now, one of the other things is obviously the payment system. So they announced their new payments and settlement systems. And so this is in the case of, if you go, I used to live in Hong Kong, you have UniPay, which is an alternative to Visa or MasterCard. India has their own, and they're building their own networks that bypass SWIFT so that countries can continue if they get sanctioned by the dollar. Also, they announced their energy cooperation platform. And so this is how they circumvent sanctions. Essentially, you can deposit and get a credit with China, and you can place an order for all of the goods that your country needs. And it technically has this almost barter-like system that technology makes possible today. And you can get around it that way because they can continue to price in dollars if they want without propping up the dollar as well. But you can also do that through the Chinese system, the Indian systems, and basically this cooperation platform where you can do oil and gas trades outside of the US dollar. And already the petrodollar has gone down from 100% to 70% through Saudi Arabia's relationship with China, because America is looking for Saudi to invest. And remember, foreign direct investment means you're relinquishing control. Think of the IMF model. The IMF invests in order to take over countries. So when America's looking for foreign direct investment, they're relinquishing control. the key assets gets owned by the other regional powers. And so that's the same with these different BRICS investment banks and these SEO investment banks as well. But Saudi is now investing in artificial intelligence and everything in America, which is more control over the American assets, while simultaneously the biggest customer of Saudi is China. And so they're going to go with their customer as well. So that's why the petrodollar, has reduced to 70%. Now, dollar's still important. Don't get me wrong. This is a slow transition. This is a controlled demolition because of the very unique situation right now. But anyway, they can clear and they can do these deals and settle without US dollars, with no dollar clearing required. And that's why you're seeing central banks and the price of gold go up and the penetration of dollars as reserve currencies at central banks decrease, which is the longer term trend. They also announced their Artificial Intelligence Innovation Center. So just like America wants to get its AI global, China wants to get its AI global as well. And so it's basically a sovereign machine learning infrastructure. And we know what that comes with: surveillance. We know what's being built up in the West. Everybody that's getting these Palantir contracts, are being surveilled into this artificial intelligence infrastructure. And so any country that wants to choose between the American side or the China side, they get to do that. And Baidu as well announced its Chinese GPS expansion. And so there is more competition with Google and the different types of companies as well. Putin was there, and Russia proposed an actual SCO bond as well. And so remember, in Russia, they've been working with structured products built upon Bitcoin to experiment with that as well. But now they're going for SCO bonds based upon local currencies. The really important thing, as was covered in the AI summary, is that Modi was present there during all of these public displays between Modi and Trump and US and India, which really strengthened the whole BRICS game as well. And this is what really makes it a public game changer. Now, I believe the game changer has happened all along. But Modi basically was standing there with Xi Jinping and Putin, which really legitimizes the SCO bloc. Because now you've got not just a Russia-China thing, not just Iran and China sanctioned countries, but you've now got half of the world's population and a significant chunk of the world's GDP. And so what does India bring to the table? Well, India has been building a VOS. So America relies upon India, and almost like these H-1B visas, where India has taken over Silicon Valley in terms of many of the executives are Indian executives. We're not just talking about, programmers, we're talking about higher paid jobs as well. And so remember what Elon said. He wanted to be anti-immigration, but he went nuts around debates when the America First agenda wanted to constrict H-1B visas, showing the sheer hypocrisy of everything. So they pretend to be anti-immigration, but they want immigration for their team members. But that technology has been going back to India, and they've been building their independent technology, just as China has been building their independent technology, which shows you that there is no America First agenda in charge of America, because BlackRock is globally invested and they're resetting the world order. And so what's India got that they bring to the table? Well, they built out a biometric ID and a domestic payments rails across the largest population in the world. And so this bypasses Visa and MasterCard. And it also has allowed India to, kind of build this block where you can fund your country, even if you're sanctioned, which is what India has been supporting both Iran and Russia in doing with their relationship through this SEO block and this BRIC blocks. And so India has been discounting Russian crude oil imports. It's been refining it and building its own refinement capabilities. And then it's been resold, which is how Europe is getting some of this oil and of the other relationship, which is undermining sanctions. And it's saying we want to be neutral. We don't adhere to American sanctions. And also, it's been defense hedging. So it's been doing it in a few ways. It's been buying weapons from the US Proof-of-Weapons Network via the military-industrial complex, but it's also been purchasing from the Russian Proof-of-Weapons Network via the Russian military-industrial complex. And it's also been building out its own manufacturing base and been doing more and more independently within India. And so this is really pushing and publicly signaling that while India has these kind of alliances with Israel, because it's also engaging in its own crazy policy of ethnic cleansing with the Muslim and the Hindu populations in order to create its own, fighting back against its own proof-of-weapons network, US civil unrest campaign for vassalization, securitization, and financialization, which the West were using to get more and more of a grip over India, but it's losing that grip. And this really is multipolar sovereignty. And so as BlackRock and Goldman Sachs, were the ones that really pushed for BRICS in the first place, I think this is an indication, more and more of an indication, that the theory that we've been covering over the years on Bitcoin Hard Talk is correct, and the general macro and geopolitical side as well. And this was the reason for Trump tariffs, as I said, in the first place. So we had narratives publicly, like Navarro came out and said, Ukraine is Modi's war, in order to drive those wedges, that public display, saying that Modi is responsible for all the deaths in Ukraine as a result of trading with Russia. And so you had this public display of US frustration. And then we went right into the Beijing parade, really displaying on full display the China Proof-of-Weapons Network as well. And so the idea was this, is to showcast the different types of weaponry to say, we're happy with the relationship with Taiwan. We stick to the one China policy, but America, you build your chips. Trump, you go buy Intel. You can follow the China model and start nationalizing aspects of your quote unquote capitalism. But at the same time, we've got our abilities, stay away and stop expanding into Philippines and Japan and Taiwan and the Asia Pacific region that the military industrial complex is currently profiting from as well. And so this really is, I don't know much about missiles, so I'll just put a few things that I listed here. So those military experts, you can put in the comment section, those that are really interested in this stuff. But some of the things were carrier knife missiles, hypersonics, which is the new form of missiles, which was beta tested in Iran penetrating Israel as well. Which is kind of a resistance against anti-US Navy for the Asia Pacific region. Drone swarms as well. Underwater systems that were on demonstration. These are kind of the asymmetric counters to a lot of the buildup in the Asia Pacific region. They also mentioned their mystery laser weapons. You saw some of those demonstrations with Russia in the Ukraine side, which really just shows that Ukraine is being sacrificed, as we've always covered. They will fight till the last Ukrainian. Ukraine is over because NATO wants it that way. And obviously the ECB and the Bank of England and the IMF will be paying for it, which is why the civil unrest campaign that's happening that I've always been covering in Europe. It also demonstrated the nuclear different types of nuclear capable systems and different armed columns as well. You can tell I'm not a military guy, but I understand that they're demonstrating all of this stuff because it's all optics. That's the whole point of this. It is a demonstration that the world order has changed And at this, you had Xi Jinping, you had Putin, and you had Kim Jong-un all together, which are all three military powers creating one form of military bloc, one nuclear-backed bloc, to really solidify, essentially, that there is competition now to tame the US Proof-of-Weapons Network and the legacy system, the military-industrial complex that essentially was really placed there to prop up the demand for dollar based upon forcing the world to buy the petrodollar, oil denominated in dollars, weapons denominated in dollars, which created this structural bid for the dollar, which was also enforced by the financial industrial complex that used the International Monetary Fund to create colored revolutions, destroy countries, overthrow governments, install Western debt-based Ponzi scheme central banks, and force them to print their currency, which created hyperinflation to service their dollar debt. And then they end up lending that debt, those dollars, to the US government so that they could prop up the demand for US treasuries that would then prop up this debt-based Ponzi scheme where the government could also borrow and vassalize countries. And the financial industrial complex, which now has been epitomized by BlackRock, State Street, Vanguard, JP Morgan, Goldman Sachs, Citibanks, this kind of apex of finance that structurally pushed up the demand for dollars, is now going to eventually need to hedge into this world order. And when you want to reset it, you use the Federal Reserve, which is owned by the banks, and you change the flow of capital via BlackRock, and the government has nothing they can do about that as well. Also, the consumer industrial complex. This is where you had companies like Amazon, Apple, Pfizer. They forced all of these deals to be done in dollars. They perpetuated these different routes all around the world. And this really created this dollar clearing department and network and demand for dollars, which also perpetuated the petrodollar, the euro dollar, and the demand for treasuries and the debt of the US government. To make that go further, the US Proof-of-Weapons Network had its technical industrial complex, companies like Microsoft, Google, Intel, and these are kind of these global supply chains based upon technical supremacy, which has taken over the US stock market, where the Magnificent Seven has created real dominance in terms of technology. And this is really a dollar clearing system, which was near total control of the world via dollar dominance. And that created the demand for debt, which is what led to this global system where China had the manufacturing base and America had the consumption, that drove this globalist agenda and this trade war that America can absolutely never win, which is how I knew the trade war was not a trade war. It was a reset of the world order, and Trump was on board of that. But through this dollar dominance, you now have the ability to use sanctions to weaponize currency in order to destroy economies, create wars, and force country into dollar adoption. That is weakened. And so now we're moving over to this multipolar world. That changes everything. That's the shift that we're seeing right now. Because now you have the Shanghai Proof-of-Weapons Network versus the US legacy Proof-of-Weapons Network that will dominate its region. We're having a transition process without complete, destruction of the Proof-of-Weapons Network assets. But eventually, the Proof-of-Weapons Network won't control the dollar. And so at some point, there will be a calculation that BlackRock Aladdin will do that say, what is the optimum time to shift capital over to these different companies and deliberately reduce the demand for the dollar while we create the financial products to shift capital away from the US Proof-of-Weapons Network over to BRICS denominated and SCO denominated financial products as well. So my prediction is that BRICS won't do the single currency. I think they watched what happened to Europe. Who was pushing that? It was Goldman Sachs that was pushing the BRICS single currency. And so clearly the euro single currency was a technique to control Europe. And so I think BRICS have said, let's not do that. Let's all have our own currencies. And we won't be in a situation where we risk losing all our sovereignty, just like the EU. And that's a protectionist strategy. So most people think of BRICS as a currency. Now you've got to think of it as everyone keeping their own currencies, but they will be at the right time propped up by the global proof-of-weapons network that is transitioning away to US alliance over to this globalist capital flows as well. And so over time, you'll have these local currencies that can essentially weaken the dollar by issuance control, and the financial industrial complex will be the ones that actually do that in competition with sovereign finance as well, which is why they won't allow a debt-based Ponzi scheme to exist as well. And so eventually, I think the financial industrial complex will adapt. It will denominate its ETFs in BRICS currencies, which it started to already do. It will create a wider and wider swap market that is not aligned with just propping up the dollar. It will create more and more derivatives, which Russia started to do with Bitcoin structured products in BRICS currencies. And basically, profit will follow yield. And so BlackRock will start to reallocate more and more capital in this controlled demolition. It doesn't want to give away all of its power because it wants to suck out of the West as much as it can while it can control the dollar. The banks create the dollar, that allows them to buy assets, and it creates all of this wealth inequality until they control everything. Eventually, that leads to civil unrest, but until it leads to civil unrest and people won't buy those bonds anymore, they'll rinse as much assets by destroying the West and buying it through private equity, which we're seeing more and more of at the current model at the moment. Remember, it has no ethics. Goldman Sachs is not aligned to any country and is a demonic force in terms of its belief around what's right for humanity. And so the military industrial complex will continue to leverage instability and essentially push out fund defense narratives to sell more weapons to Philippines, Asia Pacific, create as much turmoil across Europe to sell more weapons, which was everyone needs to put their NATO budget up to 5%. And they'll do that because they just want to push the profits of Lockheed Martin, General Dynamic. America gets more GDP, and America gets more and more civil unrest from the K-shaped economy. And so what do we see from the proof-of-weapons network? Well, it's taking its old techniques of destroying countries and it's coming in on itself. It's cannibalizing itself because it's now stateless. And it's managing that transition and managing and optimizing its portfolio using your pension, which is the irony of this whole thing. It's why I encourage people to opt out and boycott BlackRock, because while we probably won't have a massive impact, at least we'll be sovereign in our own right and we can help other people and we can direct the flow of our money. At least we can boycott in our way. I think they're too powerful. There's no reversing this train. This is the West's moment where it allowed this to happen. It's basically coming after its profits from the fact that they're a competing proof-of-weapons network within Europe and within Central America and South America, which is why you're seeing this escalation with Venezuela, despite the fact that it's the CIA that lets the drugs in, but it needs this type of escalation. And so anyone that is an American neighbor is going to be the new target for profits, lost profits by the military industrial complex. And it will continue to control its region, which is why I don't think the China or Shanghai Proof-of-Weapons Network, it will probably be exited from Latin America. And I think the legacy US Proof-of-Weapons Network will control that region. It may even start escalating into the Greenland narrative, which will push further war with Europe as well. So we'll see how far it goes. But basically expect the consumer industrial complex and the technical industrial complex, the Apples, the Microsoft, they're going to continue to lobby the European Union and the US Congress. And they'll be doing it through tariffs. They'll be doing it through different subsidies that it will be asking for through big, beautiful bills. And it will be lobbying for an anti-China rhetoric to continue because they can't relocate easily. While Apple is located in China, it still depends upon credit cards in America. And it's not going to be easy for Apple to compete with the equivalent in China. And so they are still location dependent, and that creates the power struggle as we go through this transition. And so that's why you'll get a lot more Europe for surveillance contracts, Palantir contracts, civil unrest that drives the profit engine by money printing from the Bank of England and European Central Bank. That's why we're getting all of these, Muslim hate and Jew rule the world conspiracies. I covered all of that last week if you want to get through that as well. I don't want to cover that ground as well. But this has happened before. If you think this is a conspiracy theory, this is exactly what happened when we had the transition from the British Empire to the American Empire, and in fact, the Dutch Empire to the British Empire. You had the Dutch East India Company, which consolidated vast colonial mercantile wealth. It managed those wars and it ran a portfolio. And it wasn't until the Brits invented the naval ships and started to become the rising power because cheap labor to build those ships, Britain was the cheap labor then. And then it got more productive and started to build up the British Empire and then took over the colonial empires as well. Well, that's exactly what happened in this managed transition from Britain to America. The British East India Company was slowly unwound, and you had the decolonization effect of transferring these assets through neocolonialism to America, which was done through covert wars and funding of militias around the world and colored revolutions. But now BlackRock is more powerful than the US government, so it's cannibalizing the US and Europe to shift the power up to BlackRock, which is the equivalent of the British East India Company, but a more decentralized network. It's not one company. And so they're managing this transition. And so they can manage over to BRICS currencies. And when they really want to, when there is no more to squeeze out of Apple and Amazon and everything, they can just shift their capital over and they can justify it. And so you'll just get an influx of capital once they built enough products and swaps and various other things to, Aramco and Huawei and these different types of companies, but they'll build the financial products first. But they will be less powerful because they don't control the money printing of the dollar. It will only be as powerful as the money printing of the euro and the pound and the previous empires as well. And so that's how this transition that I think we're going through right now will be managed, and we'll keep covering it as well. And this is why you had kind of the Trump's reaction and the rage and the theater and all this stuff you're seeing right now, the tariff war on India, accused Modi of basically free riding of the American economy, destroying Ukraine, being evil, this attack on the Federal Reserve, removing dollar independence, and these appearing very unhinged. But as I said, I think he's a covert financial industrial complex operative, and you can see that in all of his lobby funding. He was funded by the Bank of New York Mellon family, a member of the financial industrial complex, Elon Musk, a member of the technical industrial complex, also Adelston, which is the Israeli lobby side of the narrative, which is a covert way of Israel is a military industrial complex operative to create carnage in the region. And we'll cover more about that in part 3. But the idea is everything has to be wrapped up in a MAGA narrative. This is about making America great again. This is MAGA tariffs. This is rebuilding the manufacturing base. This is bringing jobs back to America. But we know what they're building. They're building a regional technocracy, a corporatocracy with consolidated power, destroying Main Street over to Wall Street, artificial intelligence and robotics. I'm sad to say There is no make America great again. There is no make Europe great again. They are all wolf in sheep clothing. And if you listen to them and continue to believe them, I'm sorry, they will wreck you. You got to make yourself great again. Covered that many, many times. And that's why you have to own assets and you have to boycott the system. Wall Street will prop up BRICS and manage the transition, push products across while it vassalizes the West, which is what we're seeing right now. Okay, and India is one of those swing states of these managed transition. I talked earlier about how I believe that what happened between Pakistan and India was kind of, it's a theory, but I think that was part of this managed transition. But it was likely China that resolved it, but Trump took the credit. So you get this managed theater of him wanting his Nobel Peace Prize, Pakistan nominating, India getting pissed off, and then this SEO type of thing as well. So anyway, India is currently energy hedging. As I said, buying Russia from crude, importing, doing all of that type of thing. Finance hedging, doing deals in the rupee and the ruble, the yuan, and creating those swap contracts. We're starting to see more and more of that. It's tech hedging. It's got its sovereign. It's got its own chips of this manufacturing. It's got its own cloud policy, so it doesn't need to rely upon America or China data centers. And I said that it's defense hedging. It's buying from the US, it's buying from Russia, and it's building its own manufacturing base. It's importing, as well as building its domestic capabilities as well. India basically just treats every single demand as a negotiation point, and is independent and sovereign. And it plays both sides, and it does it very effectively. Which is why it's the fastest growing economy with the largest population, and why it is, drawing closer to China as its neighbor and resolving many of those border disputes as well. And that is why it's America's turning point. This is the slow decline of the demand for the dollar, just like it was for the British Empire during World War I and World War II. And as I said, on April the 2nd, go back to the Bitcoin Hard Talk if you want, I said that Liberation Day was to liberate the emerging markets and the collective global South away from the dollar, except for its regional neighbors, which will all be terrorized by the military-industrial complex and vassalized by the financial-industrial complex, as finance is escaping the dollar and moving over to more financial products denominated in SEO, BRICS currencies, and alternative trade routes. You'll have military parity, where essentially the new multipolar world. And I think that makes everything better. And of course, the AI race, we'll be covering more about that. I promised for a while I'll do an update on who's winning the AI race. But AI sovereignty is you can either work with America or you can work with the SEO, and they're building those Baidu, to really challenge the US Proof-of-Weapons Network. So you'll be able to hedge by block, and that's where I think everything's moving to, regional blocks as a result of this, and that's why everything's changing. Okay. The SEO meeting was really that pivotal moment, and also the military display. My prediction here is that I think Bitcoin, while I'd love for it to say that we're going to take down the Proof-of-Weapons Network, it allows you to boycott and exit the Proof-of-Weapons Network. These networks are too powerful. And so while I'd love to buy into the ideology of Bitcoin taking over the world and creating this strategically neutral, I don't think that's going to happen. We're going to enter a multipolarity, and Bitcoin is a way for a few people that get this, that follow Bitcoin Hard Talk, to be able to have neutrality and the ability to exit the system, boycott the system. But if it's ever done at scale, that's why BlackRock is trying to accumulate as much as possible. And that's our battle. That's our resistance. They want to make it convenient, tax efficient for you and all the Americans to give your Bitcoin to BlackRock, and they'll create many financial products to get you to borrow against it and use the old weapons. Because eventually I do think that Bitcoin is going to be used as part of the strategic negotiation and weaponized by foreign sovereigns in these currency wars that will be coming ahead as more and more products. And they will be using Bitcoin denominated financial products to try and fool you into giving your Bitcoin. And that will be a global trend as well, I predict. And that's why the Operation Choke Point 2.0 happened. They decided that Bitcoin is too important. They're not ignoring it. They launched the Bitcoin ETF. They created the institutional custody services. They created the borrow against your Bitcoin, financialize, securitize. And it's all and they started doing the Wall Street lobbying and the stable coins and the tokenization, which is all for maintaining power and control in the surveillance state we've been covering. They want your Bitcoin in their custody, and they want to use it as leverage. For us, for Bitcoin Hard Talk members, for people that you share this with, we do self-custody, and you can go to simondixon.com, become a free member of the Bitcoin Hard Talk membership portal, and get your 8-module guide to self-custodying completely free, because that's our survival and that's our boycott. And maybe we have a bigger impact than I thought was possible, but I think we're going to still enter this multipolar world. Because Bitcoin will be a bargaining chip and for these countries as well. And it will be a neutral settlement rail. And neither the US or BRICS will want that to happen. They can't fully control it. But they don't want it to dominate the whole system, because I still think they'll still have a power in the future. So Bitcoin isn't just digital gold, which is why you end up, Wall Street will tell you, number go up, technology, fixed supply. That's just one part of it. The rest of it is money you can own and money you have as money you can spend, and the ability to countries, I think, will use it as a weapon as well. Okay. I just wanted to cover a few more points in the macro section before we go into the geopolitical section. And I'm going to speed through these as well. But I said that UK is the next target, and that really ratcheted up this week. So the yield on the 30-year bond, which is the cost to lending to the UK government for 30 years, the 30-year gilt, they call it the gilt, it rose up sharply to 5.64%, and then it went above 5.7%, and it had a real sharp increase. This is its highest since 1998. So the lead up to the dot-com boom and bust. The yields on the UK are now, so remember, bonds crash because people are selling, but yields go up because when they issue these new bonds, they have to pay a higher yield to persuade you to lend your government. But they're now 15 times higher than what they were in 2020, during the COVID period as well. So that was when they were at their low, and that was just 5 years ago. So they're at that, this is a serious reflection of what's happening with the UK economy right now. To give you some more stats of what we've seen, spending in the UK is set to cross 60% of gross domestic product. That compares to 53% during the pandemic. So during lockdown, they were spending 53% of GDP when all economic activity was shut down. They're open now and they're spending more, 60%. Revenue as a percentage, the amount of money that they're bringing in as a percentage of the GDP in the UK is drifting away slightly. It's not as concerning, but it's lower. It's gone below 40%. But they did some projections, and this is what lead to this. The projections, by their own projection, the UK government said that by 2073, the UK's debt is on course, if it continues along its current projectile, to be 274% of GDP if it doesn't make a change, which means that change is inevitable, and that will lead to full vassalization, which is why we got the civil unrest campaign I've been warning about. And Elon is not a Samaritan. He's a part of the technical industrial complex. Anybody that is part of the proof of weapons network has to be part of that agenda, because Tesla relies upon government contracts. It relies upon Wall Street. Any company that is Silicon Valley or public has to bow down to the proof of weapons network, or they can't get the access to the funds they need to borrow to buy back the stocks, to get into the S&P, to be one of those magnificent seven. It's a mafia network, and Elon is in it. And if they can't control you, they do all the different types of blackmail operations as well. This would basically imply that the UK deficit that is running at a massive 21% of GDP, the interest on this debt alone would be equal to 13% of GDP. That is unsustainable. Interest on the debt would be 13% of all of the income of the country. Under that assumption, consumer price inflation in the UK went up right now to about 3.8% was in July, and it's expected to go above 4%. And that's going to be coming in August. So this is higher than the US, as you'd expect. But this is double the level that the Bank of England says that it is targeting. So the Bank of England has lost control of inflation, even though they basically cut rates significantly. And so as deficit spending is soaring at the moment, so they're spending more, inflation is rebounding up. The Bank of England has been cutting interest rates. This is down to about 4% now. So inflation and rates are in parity at the moment. And economic growth has become so weak in the UK that they basically have no other option but to continue cutting rates, which is inflationary. And so the Bank of England is basically calling some of its inflation. Do you remember this? The Federal Reserve technique. We had the Bank of England now, a fully vassalized state, calling the inflation that we're experiencing in the UK as transitory. Where did we hear that one before? And we know what followed: massive inflation in the US when the Fed said it's transitory. So GDP growth in the UK is completely flattened off. And in Q3 2024, it actually went into negative growth. So negative growth, higher inflation. The UK is basically streaming towards stagflation. And this will be for the first time since 2008, which led to the global financial crisis. Where did that start? It started with the investment banking takeover of Iceland that led to distress in Northern Rock, which is a UK bank that Virgin ended up buying, I think, in the end. And BlackRock engineered the process of which banks were acquired, which was the consolidation of power using BlackRock's Aladdin artificial intelligence. What did they buy? They bought Barclays, a UK bank's ETF department that gave them the vassalization control in this multi-decade operation. So what is Britain's growth plan in order to get out of this? Well, the idea is to push public debt beyond 100% of GDP. It's approaching 100%. It's in financial crisis. I believe this will potentially lead to a blame shift scenario. How do you blame shift? What you have to do? Well, what you do is you take out an IMF bailout. Now, there was just a few people that were pushing the IMF narrative. It's pretty speculative. I'm not sure whether they're going to do it. They have done it previously in the 1970s. But there was rumors, and maybe these are controlled narratives, that the UK is going to need an IMF bailout. Now, what does an IMF bailout come with? It is the economic hitmen at the IMF using the tactics that they used on the global south on the UK itself. What does it come with? It comes with austerity. So you have significant economic weakness, cutting, and BlackRock acquires all the assets. And so this is why ordinary Britons have to pay the bill. They'll get less subsidies, less welfare, and that will lead to the austerity, which is needed. There's no two ways about it. And that's because they run their own debt-based Ponzi scheme. The Bank of England was the creator of this. But what did the UK government get to do when they take an IMF bailout? They get to blame it on the IMF. So it's a blame shift exercise, and they get to point to those austerity while US companies acquire all the distressed assets and control more and more of the country. Who are the US companies? The Proof-of-Weapons Network. So it's a full-blown takeover vassalization. And who are they partnering with in these investments? Sovereign wealth funds in the Middle East, which is why you're getting these negotiations between the Middle East to get the Proof-of-Weapons Network out of their country, and these vassalization strategies. Now, you use NATO in order to escalate more and more war, which gets more and more ECB and Bank of England printed money over to US GDP, and you get the justification for the quantitative easing that's needed based upon having an IMF guarantee or bailout as well. So for 2025 alone, what have we done? We've sent, while this is happening, $4.5 billion of direct military aid to Ukraine. That's all propped up the BlackRock Proof-of-Weapons Network, funded all the corrupt politicians that are owned by the Proof-of-Weapons Network. We've also taken a £2.26 billion loan, billion-dollar loan, which is G7 backed and to be repaid by frozen Russian assets. But we've guaranteed that as well. So we have to make sure that those frozen assets happen. The $350 million investment in drone production is also something we've signed up for. The EU and the US, by the way, as I said, they're still importing billions of dollars from Russia and pretending that they're sanctioning the whole horse and pony show, while America's funding USAID in order to fund US media and BBC media as well. On top of that, what is Britain committing to do is pledged $3 billion that they're going to spend every year on who? Israel, up until 2030 to 31, in order to train its military industrial complex on the same technology that Israel's using to commit genocide as a service and occupation as a service. Is also spending $2 billion basically to train these 60,000 British troops a year in Britain using this occupation as a service technology. So basically, on the guidance of the occupying power, that is a colony of America and the mafia of the Proof-of-Weapons Network, and those that created the technology for occupation as a service and all of the artificial intelligence technology and surveillance technology, just in case anybody wants to, leave the UK, why would they need to do that? Because they're probably going to apply a wealth tax and an exit tax. So for the next 5 years, you have to pay tax on all your assets if you dare to try and leave the UK. This is the UK following the US model. You become a lifetime taxpayer even when you try to escape. These are my speculations of where it's all headed to, which is why you had that exodus of wealthy people, billionaires and millionaires, all leaving. The plan is simple. It's to fund wars. It's to spend budget on occupation. It's to implement surveillance. It's to use artificial intelligence. And it's a formula that basically grows US GDP at the expense of the British people that are basically managing these manufactured civil unrest campaigns. Exactly what they did in the global south. This is the colonial tactics coming on itself. And this is what I try to warn against everybody, that Elon's not here to help you. Tommy Robinson's not here to go anti-immigration. He's okay with Indian immigrants. He's just stirring up the anti-Muslim narrative to reignite the war on terror, which was an operation in the first place to implement Patriot Act. Sorry, I've gone deeper into it. But this is all about pushing forward the pre-crime agenda, which will be, all of the technology in Washington And yes, September the 13th is highly, highly likely to be the civil unrest campaign, the flashpoint that Elon and Tommy is taking us through for the Proof-of-Weapons Network, all because they did that immigration policy to manufacture this very type of environment. Make sure you watch last week's episode. I went in deep detail, and I really want people to understand it. Once you understand these things, you can predict them as they're coming. It's all about manufacturing consent, manufacturing compliance, and then the solution is there, which is Peter Thiel, Elon Musk technology, which were funded by the CIA and Palantir and all these different types of things. And obviously, immigrants will be the ones that they'll blame because they manufactured it in the first place. And it's real. People are angry. People are angry, is it? But everybody's nearly a pawn in the operation, and all the profits go back. And so my advice is exit while you can. I don't know any other way because I don't see how this changes. I don't see the solution, and you have to really decide where you want to live. Because what are the wealthy doing? They've already left. They're leaving in drove. And where did they go? They went to the Middle East. They've gone to UAE. That's the highest recipient. What's happening in Japan? They're freeing themselves from the Proof-of-Weapons Network. That means more inflation. And we're seeing the 30-year bond in Japan reflect that as well. It just broke 3.2%. That was for the first time in history. We also saw a similar narrative in France as well, exact same thing. But France can't print its own currency. It's vassalized into the European Central Bank. So that takes what happens in France across the whole region. So you've got these three different experiments. You've got Japan leaving. You got all of these reset of orders with the BRICS and GCC territories. And so what is actually happening? And then you've got the France and European campaign. Gold is on fire. Gold hits new all-time highs on the macro section. World central banks' gold holdings have now gone to 27% of total foreign reserves. That's the highest in 29 years. So they are selling dollars and buying gold. They're protecting themselves wherever they can find the gold. Foreign holdings of US treasuries as a percentage of their actual reserves has declined now to 23%. That's the lowest since 2008, before the global financial crisis. Global central banks now hold more gold than treasuries, and that's for the first time since 1996, leading to the 2000 dot-com boom and bust. And this trend has basically begun decades ago. This has been a multi-decade trend. And this basically really, really accelerated after the 2023. After 2023, what happened? Sorry, in 2022. What happened in 2022? That's when the operation to seize Russia's frozen assets, which was the preceder to the tariff policy. And there was COVID before that. All of those together created this exact type of environment. And that was the real reduction in treasuries and a movement over to gold. And so since 2015, it's been reported that global central bank gold holdings have basically risen to 3,500 tons now. So it rose by 3,500 tons, and it's now at 36,500 tons, which is the highest since the 1970s, which was the stagflation environment. So foreign central banks, they're loading up on gold. Individuals are loading up on Bitcoin. The Proof-of-Weapons Network is trying to get you to own their Bitcoin through their Bitcoin ETF. And at the same time, we're getting these big destabilization campaigns happening in America. We had Trump firing the Fed governor, Cook. Now they want a majority of the governor cabinet, whatever you call it, on the Federal Reserve. This is removing Federal Reserve independence. That was a cornerstone of global capital trust in the dollar. Trump will essentially likely control 4 of the seven Fed governor seats if he can get rid of Chairman Jerome Powell as well. So I'm starting to hit my tired face. That's the fiscal dominance stage, and I think we're all going to. All roads are pointing to the same thing, that we're moving to this multipolar world order, and I think that's what the SCO thing was all about. We're even starting to see America start to take more and more stakes in companies. So it needs Intel, tried to rebuild a chip manufacturer. Howard Lutnick came in, said it wants shares in Fannie Mae. Is shifting towards the China model. This is the model where the government won't let these large corporations, or it takes the strategically important ones. And what is it? It's only the ones that are required for regional power. So the US Proof-of-Weapons Network wants to invest in a multipolar world order, but it wants America to have its own defense, which is shares in shares in Lockheed Martin. It wants to merge Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac so it can prop up the real estate market. And it wants semiconductor chip, which is the new resource that's needed as it turns America into a ginormous data center that needs to suck up lots of water while they tokenize, financialize, and securitize every single asset so that you have to compete with BlackRock for your resources. And more equity positions are being accumulated by the government as the rest of the assets are used to create the K-shaped economy that leads to civil unrest. And so I'm sorry that it's a bleak picture, but I want you to know the truth, because the only way to escape that is for you to own scarce assets, whether it's gold, whether it's Bitcoin. I think Bitcoin's a great equalizer because you don't need to hold it in custody. But if you do not own assets, your fiat currency will get completely treated like an ice cube, melted away. You'll never be able to get on the property ladder because the value of your fiat currency goes down while real estate is propped up by this proof-of-weapons network. And you need to decide, where you want to live, whether you want to stay and fight or whether you want to escape like many rich and wealthy. And that's everything that happened over the last 2 weeks in macroeconomics. So I hope you get a realistic picture of this. But once you have a realistic picture, then that's what you need in order to develop a plan. If we just say it's all good, and the good thing is even if this doesn't happen, even if I'm completely wrong, preparing for this is what's going to keep you ahead and make you one of those people that is able to escape this as well. So that's everything that I'm going to be covering this week in macro. Part 3 is going to be covering this week in geopolitics. And we're going to be going through the latest of what's happening. And I really want you to stay around for this one because I'm going to be analyzing the Gaza plan. And even if you don't care about what's happening in Gaza, I've been saying all along, you must care because we saw the plan. And the plan is, I think, essentially what they're going to be doing and trying to do on you as well. So we're going to be moving over to part 3. If you've enjoyed this, please do subscribe. I want as many people to be prepared. Hit the subscribe button, hit the bell symbol, hit all. Follow me over on X. I do live, I do spaces. I can answer your questions in real time. Follow me on Rumble. It's going to be the backup if YouTube takes me down. So we're streaming from there. Make sure you've got the Bitcoin Hard Talk podcast downloaded on Apple or Spotify. And head over to simondixon.com and make sure you've got a free membership to the Bitcoin Hard Talk membership portal where you can get your guide to self-custody and various other resources to manage this transition. And that's everything for this week in macro. Part 2, the SCO and the Shanghai Proof-of-Weapons Network and everything that's happening as a result from the legacy Proof-of-Weapons Network. I'm going to take some water briefly, and we'll be back very shortly with part 3 this week in geopolitics.